Hello, and welcome to Grant's Tech World. Here, I have nearly a decade-old Olympus Pen EPL5 Lite. So you might be asking yourself, what does this camera have anything to do with modern-day smartphones, and how their cameras are so good, even though they really have no right to be that good? Well, absolutely nothing. Now, admittedly, yes, the great-great-great-grandchildren to this fossil do have some meaning behind modern smartphone cameras, but this unit in particular does not. Today I'm going to be explaining why smartphone cameras are at a disadvantage and the amazing work that has been done through post-processing to make them look delicious. Welcome to Grant's Tech World. I hope that you enjoy. Now, to keep things simple and keep the purpose of this video intact, to go over mirrorless cameras and the parts, we're going to break it down into three things. The first is the lens. So the lens serves two main functions on a mirrorless camera like this. The first is focus, this knob, smaller knob is focus, and zoom, which is also known as focal length. You can see the millimeter measurements on the camera here. So focus basically refers to the clarity of an image given the distance away from the camera. So focus is determined, like I said, how far your subject is away from this particular camera, and it's influenced by a lot of factors, including the aperture size, so how wide, I don't know if you can see it very well on camera, but how wide this opening is in the camera, as well as a huge number of other factors. And then there's focal length or zoom. This obviously tells you how zoomed in the image is. You can think of it like cropping an image on a modern smartphone. Now, zoom just refers to what the camera can actually see, and it basically just restricts the amount of light coming in, and it restricts the kind of field of view of the camera, and then all the lenses and all the inner workings of this lens body here basically redirect it so that it fills the entire field of view. Modern day smartphones do not have focal length for the most part. There are some with crazy cool zoom lenses, especially from the likes of Sony, and I know Nokia's got one that looks pretty wild too. But most of them do have focus just because that's a part of photography and it will always be, and ever since we've been able to put that in smartphones we have, just because it's such a useful feature. The second aspect we need to talk about is the sensor. So the sensor is what takes the light that comes in through the lens and interprets it. Now, overall, you want to have a larger sensor size. And the reason for this is that sensors are made up of tiny little individual pixels that interpret the light as a value and interpret its color as well. The benefit of having a larger sensor, so compare a smartphone to even a mirrorless 4/3 camera, which in the world of cameras does not have a huge sensor, is two things. Number one, you have better low light photography and you have better depth of field. This is especially important in cameras where you're going to be shooting in all sorts of scenarios, and especially indoors. The other option, if you have a larger sensor and you don't really care about the amount of light that's getting to the sensor, is to increase resolution. Get more of those pixels on that sensor area, and then you can thus be able to zoom in more without it becoming pixelated. Smartphones have tiny, tiny cameras, and so their sensors are very, very, very small. This becomes an issue with light. You see, the thing that cameras have to do is bump up what's known as ISO. This is the camera's sensitivity to light, and so this will introduce grain and other artifacts in the image. That's the big disadvantage of smartphone cameras, and that's why they have to use post-processing, which we'll get to in just a second, to fix all those imperfections. The last part we need to talk about is the body of the camera. So the body is this rectangle here. The body of the camera is what houses the sensor, which is located roughly right there on this Olympus camera, and which supports the lens. It's especially important because it also houses the electronics, which control things such as autofocus, white balance, stuff like that. The basic things that you're going to be shooting with on a camera like this. However, in smartphones, the body is the rest of the camera, which is literally like, I don't know, I'm just looking at here, it's like 12 times the size of the actual camera assembly itself. And so it's essential that we use the insane power of smartphone bodies to do some crazy things to the image, which is what they do through a process called post-processing. So post-processing is the behind-the-scenes magic that makes your smartphone images look so darn good. And there are a few aspects I want to highlight right now. The first is exposure. This is basically the measure of how much light is being let into the sensor. So basically, how often and for how long the sensor is being exposed to light. This can be altered on the fly while you're taking the picture, but it can also be adjusted through really fancy software afterwards. White balance is another important one, which is something cameras like this don't usually correct for accurately. So white balance is basically just saying it's finding out what in the image should be a true white. So let's take, I don't know, this for example. This is a slightly off-white image. And so my camera currently is saying, hey, that's like a really light gray. Let's correct everything in this image to that. And so it's basically just taking all the colors and shifting them so that they all look accurate enough. Your smartphone is also able to adjust highlights and shadows. So I don't know if it's coming clear to you guys, but right here I see a highlight coming from my light box right here and kind of streaking this right along the desk, and there's also some through here. These highlights are being adjusted by my camera to not be as harsh. Sometimes, especially with the sun and direct sunlight, highlights can become too much, and so your camera is attempting to correct for that by making those darker and making the rest of the image appear lighter, and then balancing it all out and averaging it. The other thing is shadows. So obviously we all know what a shadow is, right? There's a shadow slightly on my entire face from this hat and from the way the light is positioned across my face. My phone is currently trying to correct for that, make sure that you can see the detail on my face while also noticing the shadows, which is really quite important. Now, cameras can sometimes mess this up. If they overcorrect for white balance, things can look just really washed out. If they overcorrect for shadows, things can look muted and grainy. And so it wants to make sure that it doesn't overdo either of these because they are really important aspects of photography. Another key one is saturation. So this basically just says how bold or how muted different colors are. Saturation is something that gets messed up by this camera in particular a lot. Especially under direct sunlight, everything comes out orange and it's nasty. So we want to make sure that when we're developing post-processing software that cameras are able to correct for the saturation and make things look accurate while still looking vibrant and alive. Or not, since it's fall right now. However, in my opinion, there are two post-processing techniques and two things that your camera changes that really make images shine. The first is noise reduction. So noise refers to the amount of invisible light that is interpreted by your sensor. So this includes things such as ultraviolet light rays from the sun and infrared rays from things like TV remotes and just natural background stuff. If these hit your image, especially in darker areas, they can cause little purple spots or blue spots or just kind of gray spots in darker areas and can even be a problem in lighter areas too. Noise reduction attempts to smooth these over and make the image generally look perfect while also retaining detail, which can sometimes be an issue. The other thing is sharpening. Sharpening is also super important. You don't want the image to just look like it's flat. I don't know if that was a good demonstration at all, but you want things to look 3D. I don't mean like red and blue and the fancy goggles. I mean just natural 3D, what you see in video games. And so the attempt is made to have things sharp around the edges where they should be and just kind of blend in where maybe they shouldn't be so sharp. So what's the point of this entire video? Why have I been blabbling on for, insert time here, minutes, to bring you all this information? Well, it's all to say that post-processing is really important, and the magic that happens inside your smartphone camera is really quite cool. And honestly, it's what manufacturers put a lot of time and effort into. When's the last time you saw a commercial about a smartphone with a camera? So manufacturers are trying to push, hey, we can do this cool thing with our camera because of software and post-processing. For example, one thing I like to highlight is Google and their Pixel lineup. You can see all skin tones accurately, and you can see in the dark, and erase things that shouldn't be in your image. That's all post-processing, and so that's what companies are trying to highlight. And it's only going to get better with time through the advancement of processing power in smartphones, the software that's being processed, and the actual smartphone technology, because inevitably that's going to get better with time. But for me, there's always going to be something great about old nuggets like this guy. Thank you so much for watching, and honestly, I'm really glad to be back. If you have any future ideas, suggestions, things you'd like to see on the channel, make sure to put that in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. I really enjoy making these videos, and I hope to see you in the next one. This has been Grant's Tech World. I'll see you later.